a presentation by Laura Franco, who is a career advisor at McGill for CAPS, and she's going to be talking a little bit about how to prepare for interviews, and I think, you know, a little bit on more specifically for research interviews, and then we will kind of go into more of a Q&A style session. We have Dr. Wolfson here, who is a researcher, and her research focuses on the study of neurological disorders in the population, and you know, has conducted research on multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, and dementia. So we will get into that after this presentation. Laura, if you want to go ahead.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Erica. Let me just share my screen so that everybody can see what I'm seeing. All right, so thank you for inviting me tonight. I know it's an important topic that a lot of you are super interested in, just because I know a lot of you are interested in getting some research experience. So I'm here tonight to share some tips and tricks to help you ace your next interview. All right. So some of the learning outcomes for tonight, we're going to be talking about several different things. So the first thing is how to prepare prior to an interview and to understand what constitutes post-interview etiquette, right? So the full cycle from start to finish. We will also be talking about how to develop some strategies to communicate your skill sets and experiences in the interview process. And then finally, I'm going to be sharing some resources and helping you all identify some resources for preparing and practicing to help you build your confidence prior to an interview. I think the number one goal or the number one message I want to convey tonight is that preparation and practice will help you make you feel so much more confident. So that's what we're going to really focus on today. All right. How to start, right? So you've applied either by email, or maybe you've dropped by in office hours and you've discussed and dropped off your CV for that research opportunity. Typically speaking, nowadays, I think most researchers might reach out to you by email, but in the off chance they give you a phone call, what are you going to do, right? So your phone is ringing and it's the research opportunity you've been hoping for. Now what, right? So first thing you want to consider is, where are you? Are you in a location where you're going to hear them clearly? You're going to be gathering the important information, or are you on the metro where it's super loud? You might not hear what they're trying to say. You might lose connectivity. Are you at a restaurant or a cafe that's super loud as well? Maybe, do you have a chance to step outside quickly? Is it going to be quieter for you? If not, it's probably best that you leave it to voicemail. If they leave a voicemail, what should you do? Typically, you would want to respond to that voicemail in about 24 hours maximum, but try and keep it during business hours, right? So 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. If you call them on the weekend, yes, you might seem eager, but it also might come across as a little bit too pushy in the interview sense. The last thing you need to think about if you're going to be answering the phone call, or if you're going to be communicating with somebody by email, is to gather all the important interview details, right? So are you ready to take down the information? Are you going to create a new note on your phone? Are you going to have a pen and paper ready to go? And think about, you know, the location. Where will the location of the interview be if it is in person, right? That's something important that you do need to know so that you know where to go. Or maybe what platform will they be using if it's a video interview, right? So again, identifying, making sure that you have the software downloaded ahead of time so that you can be as prepared as possible. What type of interview is it going to be? How many interviewers? What are their names? So this is all really important information to gather.
Oh, here.
And so, you know, the type of interview, we're going to be talking about a few different types. So we'll be kind of going over all the different types in a moment. How many interviewers is important, right? So that you're in the right mental state of mind. If you're expecting a one-on-one and then all of a sudden it's a panel of 5 people, your nerves might go, you know, through the roof. So it's always important to gather that information ahead of time if you can. And then what are their names, right? A big part of interviewing for a research opportunity is to demonstrate your knowledge about the research that these folks are already doing, right? So it's really important to get their names so that you can do a thorough Google search So you can look them up on LinkedIn so that you can look on all the McGill University websites to see what current studies they're completing, maybe things they've worked on in the past, and really start that process of researching for the research opportunity. Another thing you'll want to ask is how long will the interview be? Again, you can't assume that it'll only be, 15, 20 minutes. They might have set aside, an hour and a half to meet with you. Maybe they want to show you a tour of the lab afterwards, right? So making sure that you're selecting a time that really works for the duration of the interview. And then last thing, super important, requesting the email or phone number of a main contact. Okay, so in general, maybe the morning of the interview, you're feeling super under the weather, or the metro breaks down and you're running 20 minutes late. How can you communicate with that person that you're still interested, but something unexpected has happened and you'll either have to arrive late or that you'll have to reschedule, right? Super important information to have. Without this information, they're going to think that you just ghosted them, you didn't show up, and that you're no longer interested. Okay. Finally, make sure you're demonstrating gratitude. So saying thank you. I know it's hard in the moment, you might be super nervous, but saying thank you and feeling excited about the opportunity. Okay. Making sure that enthusiasm is clear in your voice. All right. So I talked a little bit, or I alluded a little bit to formats and types of interviews. So the first type is the standard Q&A. Somebody's asking you a question, you're responding to it, and this could be done either in person, on the phone, or on video call. There's also behavioral or role play interviews. So they might ask you questions like, if X, Y, Z were to happen, what would you do, right? They want to see your problem solving skills in these types of interviews. Also, med school interviews, the MMIs, those are all role play. You're kind of thrown into a scenario and you have to use your logical reasoning and your problem solving skills to demonstrate how you would deal with that situation. A technical test. So for example, if the research opportunity you're really interested in needs you to use a particular type of statistical software, or you're going to be using Excel a lot, then the researcher might ask you, hey, I have this 20-minute Excel performance test that I want you to take so that I know what your technical abilities are truly in Excel. Okay, that's another thing that they might ask you to do. A case study. So this is more common in business, but it could also be common in research settings as well. They might give you some homework. They might want you to, do a quick survey of what's out there, present your findings, come back either a day or two later and present your findings so that they know that you're the best candidate for that role. And then the final type or format or type of interview I'll be discussing today is a psychometric assessment. So again, not super typical for research interviews, more so for like business settings, that kind of thing. But they might want to see, if your personality and your teamwork style fits in with the rest of their team, right? So that's something that they might ask for. So again, it's important to ask in the initial stages before you even go meet with them in person, which components are going to make up the interview, right? Are they going to have the standard Q&A first for half an hour, then, do some behavioral and role play for half an hour, and then do a technical test at the end? You want to mentally prepare for that. You don't want to be blindsided by an Excel test that you haven't studied for, right? All right. I've also included for tonight's presentation a little checklist that can help you mentally prepare prior to an interview. So now that you have all the information about the interview, what else can you do? So main thing, especially for research opportunities, is researching the organization, researching the department, researching who's there, who's researching, how long have they been there, where have they maybe, done studies or research before, and really looking at those key individuals that you might be working with to demonstrate your knowledge of what they're doing. I think that that's really one of the main important things for a research opportunity. And I'm curious to know from the other presenters tonight if that's really the case, right? Going over the job description, if there was one posted. So one thing that you can do to really, again, make yourself stand out as a candidate is comb through that job posting, take a look at which keywords are shared there, take a look at which top qualities that they're looking for, which tasks you might be assigned, and really use that information and place it strategically in your answers throughout the interview. Again, it demonstrates your knowledge and your level of preparedness. You might also want to go over your cover letter and your CV, just in case they ask specific questions about it and you have multiple versions of your cover letter and CV that you've been sending out, okay? Another type of preparation would be to really take some time and reflect upon yourself, to know yourself, to understand the skill sets that you bring to the table, the values that you hold, and your strengths and weaknesses, right? So these are all things you're going to have to communicate very clearly within an interview setting. So it's good to take a few hours, maybe even a few days, to kind of think about it. And if you're struggling to find and pinpoint some of these things, it's always good to meet with a career advisor or to ask a trusted friend or family member, because they know you very well, and they might have some suggestions for you as well. Now that you've identified those things, it's really important to use stories from your past experiences to illustrate your point, okay? Anyone can walk into a research interview or any other type of interview and say, I'm a born leader. I'm extremely organized. I'm extremely efficient. I'm very punctual, but without any proof and without any evidence of you demonstrating these qualities, they're very hard to believe, okay? So we're going to talk about in a moment how to pair each one of those key qualities with a story to really make them come to life, okay? Preparing questions for them. Again, in North America, this is the standard. Interviews are more of a dialogue these days, right? So they are expecting you to have, 4, 5, 6 questions at the end, pre-prepared to ask them. And I put a little asterisk here because I don't have time to go over it in my presentation, but I have included a slide at the end, actually 2 slides at the end, that you can review on your own time of some questions you might want to use at the end of an interview. Another quick thing that you need to prepare, you have to plan your appearance. Again, maybe you're going to be on campus all day. You might want to bring a change of clothes if you feel like that's going to really help you stand out in the interview. Just being prepared, looking professional, again, really goes a long way. And then finally, planning your setup time. So whether it's at home, on your laptop, or whether you're traveling to campus to meet with somebody or meeting them elsewhere, really give yourself at least 15 minutes buffer, because there's no excuse these days for being late. There's Google Maps, you know exactly how many minutes, I know from my door here to McGill campus takes me 37 minutes exactly, right? We have no excuse these days for being late. So it's really important to plan your time and ensure that you're getting there in a timely fashion. All right, so I did allude to the fact that I'm going to help you bring your answers to life by telling your story. So in general, you're not a mind reader. You're not going to know which questions are going to be asked of you, right? You can start anticipating questions. You can start looking at different types of common interview questions. And if you're preparing your top 5 stories or your top 5 key strengths, then you can kind of use them as building blocks and plug them into different questions that are asked, right? I don't expect you to, have a very prepared, succinct answer for every type of interview question. But if you have these 5 stories, these 5 strengths to pull from, again, you'll be prepared and you can kind of use them in strategic ways to answer different types of questions that you might be asked. All right, so how do you showcase your strengths? Really simple. You want to be using the STAR method. So the STAR method really helps you kind of think through and jot down some notes ahead of time on how you want to formulate your story, okay? So you want to present the situation. Where were you? Which work experience was this? Which volunteer experience? Was this in a classroom setting? You want to present the task. So I was assigned this project at this previous work experience that I had to complete, and these were my objectives. These were the actions that I took. So that's the A in the STAR method. What were the results of your actions? And then finally, the reflection. Did it go well? Would you improve different things the next time, right? So this type of formula really helps kind of navigate those stories and makes them as complete as possible when you try and associate them with those strengths, okay? So I've included here 3 skills and experiences on the left-hand side. And then, in general, you don't always have to use paid work experiences to find these examples, right? Maybe some of you haven't had the opportunity to have a research experience yet or to have that part-time job. It's okay to draw upon examples from your academic experience. So your coursework, some of the theories that you've learned in your coursework. You can use, community involvement as part of your example as well, right? So if you're looking at, for example, organization skills, you can draw upon, your previous summer internship. And you can talk about the situation. Maybe you were, working on multiple projects. You can tell them where you were working, which department you were in, the tasks that you were assigned, the projects that you were completing. And even if the story, the result isn't always the best, it's okay because you're adding that reflection piece. anybody who's interviewing you, no matter if it's for research or if it's for a summer internship or a career opportunity 10 years from now, they want to know that you're able to reflect on your mistakes or your missteps and to learn from them and to grow from them. Okay, so you need to have that growth mindset. So that's why the last R in the STAR method is very important. You want to demonstrate that your willingness to learn and grow from your mistakes. Okay, so included a whole bunch of other examples here. And I've also included a link at the bottom of this slide where you can, see a video and see somebody providing a bit more examples of the STAR method. Okay. All right, so we talked about pre-interview. We talked about during their interview and how to prepare. Now I'm going to share some tips and tricks for after the interview. So the first thing you might want to do is to reflect. Again, that self-reflection piece is the only way that you're going to learn and grow from your interview experiences. We don't expect anybody to be perfect in interviews, but it is your opportunity to assess your performance and assess the individual's performance that you were meeting with, or the panel's performance as well. Okay. So what did you do well? That's the first thing you should think about. Maybe jot down a few things or jot down a few questions that you answered well, because it's really easy after an interview, your nerves are all over the place. It's very easy to focus on the negatives, but I do want to challenge you to think about the positives as well, okay? Then you might want to think about what questions were you unprepared for, okay? So that you can focus on practicing those better for the next time. You can also ask yourself, do you still want to work for them? Maybe all the stuff you read online was amazing, but you meet with them in person and maybe you just don't have that click moment, or you don't have a great vibe with them. And maybe you have other interviews coming up, right? That would be the ideal scenario. So, think about, do you still want to work with them? Is this still a good opportunity for you? Or maybe the way that they presented it into the interview is completely different than what you thought it would be, based off of the job description. Okay. So you're allowed to, after an interview, to reassess your candidacy. Okay. Are you still interested in this career goal? Does this still align with, the career trajectory you want, or the academic trajectory that you want? This is another question you might want to ask yourself. The other component of, post-interview etiquette is the gratitude. Okay. So sending a thank you email. I know a lot of students think that this is very old school and that's not going to help. People are going to just think it's annoying, but no, I assure you that if they're picking between you and another candidate and you're the only one that sends a thank you email, it's going to, stick. It's going to make that difference. I've heard of this happening many, many times within the McGill community and different departments across the university. Okay. So you want to confirm your interest if you are still interested. So let them know that you're still open to the opportunity. You might want to refer to something new or interesting that you learned during the interview that they spoke about, maybe a connection that both of you have. Maybe you both figured out that you love hiking, or that you both love baking or something like that. Or maybe you learned more about their research that really intrigues you. You can also, tell them something you forgot to mention, but I will, say that with a little asterisk. You definitely don't want to go on and on. It's not an invitation to write another cover letter, 3 to 4 paragraphs of new information. No, keep it short, keep it concise, and communicate whatever you need to communicate as clearly as possible. Okay. And then finally, the last kind of piece of post-interview etiquette that I want to share with you all is follow up. Be proactive, follow up on your candidacy in the timeframe that they suggested. So in any interview setting, whether again, it's research, it's summer internship, or it's 10 years from now, you really do want to make sure that you're asking in the interview, what are the next steps in the interview process? And when should I expect to hear back from you? Okay. Again, you can't assume that it's one interview, it's Q&A and that's it. Maybe, after the first interview, they're going to send you to human resources, or they're going to send you to the department head, or they might send you to their PhD student. You never know, right? So you can't assume it's just one and done. Figure out what the time frame is, figure out what the next steps are, and follow up. Really be proactive with this. All right. The final few slides here that I wanted to share with you. There's one really key resource that you all have free access to as McGill students. It's a platform called Interview Stream. Either you can write your own questions and input them. They'll be randomized and you'll be asked them, in a random order, or they have some questions preloaded that you can kind of pick a topic. And you can record yourself, you can watch it back, you can evaluate yourself, or you can send it to one of us in the career advising team for feedback. Another few quick suggestions for you all. I'm going to plug our CAPS resources. So we have our career readiness workshops that happen every month. If you click on the link there, it'll navigate you to what's happening next. You can also view recordings on MS Stream. So if you don't have the time to attend our workshop, or if it conflicts with an exam or a class that you have, you can always try to find what you're looking for on the MS Stream. And I've linked that here as well. We also have our how-to guides. So I think it's about 9 or 10 publications at this point, to help you kind of DIY your job search process. And I've also linked the how to interview one here, and we just updated it. So it includes all these things about video interviews and in-person interviews that we discussed today. And then finally, My Future, you do want to take a look there in case any new research opportunities are posted. All right. I just want to summarize everything, and then I'll pass it back to Erica. So the first thing we talked about today was, how to prepare and understand interview etiquette. So, how to start off the interview process in the right way, making sure that you're confident, making sure you're following up quickly if they're calling or they're emailing you, and making sure you're gathering all the necessary pieces of information that you need to be successful in the interview, okay? You also want to think about introducing yourself in a clear and professional way. If it's a networking event or if it's just going to office hours, preparing those questions to ask the interviewer is very important as well. Because again, it's a dialogue. You want to, learn more about them just as much as they want to learn about you. And then finally, the last piece of interview etiquette we discussed was the follow-up email, the thank you email after the interview. We also discussed today how to practice for interviews. So again, knowing yourself, knowing your needs and your strengths is very important so that you can communicate them clearly to the person you're speaking with. Taking a look at the job description to match your skill sets with what they're looking for is very important as well. Understanding how to convey your top 5 strengths by associating them with those stories. Practicing tough interview questions. So again, I've included some practice interview questions at the end of this presentation. So if any of those, stand out to you and you're like, oh my goodness, I have no idea how I would answer that, those are the first ones that you're going to want to try and practice. And then finally, book a mock interview with a career advisor. That's what we're here for. If you want to practice with us, we're more than happy to do so. As soon as you find out you have an interview, call us and schedule something, because oftentimes we don't have any last minute appointments. So it's really important to schedule that ahead of time if you can. And then finally, we talked about McGill's career resources, the interview stream platform, the how-to guides, and attending workshops, okay? So if any of you want to meet with us, you do have to go through our administrative team. So you can either call us and leave a voicemail or email careers.caps@mcgill.ca, and someone will get back to you and help schedule a time. Okay, so that's really all I have to share for today. But I will share the slides in the chat. I have a few slides at the end that have additional resources and information.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I think that was a lot of information, and everybody, definitely seemed to at least learn a lot. So does anybody have any questions, like right off the bat? You can put them in the chat or raise your hand. If not, we do have some questions for both of our speakers that were submitted beforehand. But yeah, are there any questions right away? Does not look like it. Okay. So I guess I'll just introduce our next speaker, which I, did a little bit of at the beginning. But we have Dr. Wolfson here. We did have another researcher, but unfortunately she was not able to attend last minute. But yeah, we have Dr. Wolfson here. Dr. Wolfson, if you wouldn't mind telling us maybe a little bit about your research before we get started.
Unmute, that's the first lesson, right? So as Erica said, I'm an epidemiologist actually, but I focus my research in neurological conditions. I was originally trained in statistics, so my undergraduate degree is actually in mathematics, and my master's is in statistics, and my PhD is in epidemiology. So I do large scale studies. I'm currently leading a study of 50,000 people across Canada, where we collect data on them every 3 years. So I actually do a lot of interviewing for different kinds of positions. I interview people for full-time jobs. I interview people who are going to be actually hired as interviewers. I hire people who are going to do data collection, who are actually taking blood pressure and taking blood. So I hire nurses, but I also recruit, and I'm not going to say hire, I'm going to say I recruit a lot of either graduate students, but I'm particularly interested in recruiting undergraduate students. And I even more particularly like to recruit students who have no research experience, because I remember as an undergraduate, as the first generation in my family to go to university, I just didn't know how to get into doing research. I didn't have any connections. I didn't know. I knew my professors. I would sit in front of the class, but I thought I'm not going to ask my professor for advice. So I really like the idea of giving opportunities to students, U0s, U1s, but all the way through, to maybe do research for the first time. And I think when it comes to interviewing, what Lara said, I took notes, because this is really useful information for me. A lot of things I can actually absolutely validate. But I think the other thing you should know is that academics are not experts in interviewing. And I'm sure Lara will say that. We don't get these kinds of courses. We don't get training on how to interview. So I would say that you've got to be ready for an interview taking a weird turn that you don't expect. Because most of us have not read the documentation about how an interview should go. So we might just go in many different directions. So, I don't know if you want me to say any more about how I interview, Erica, or, that's what I do.
Yeah,
okay.
that'd be great.
So I recruit students, I recruit students all the way from medical students, students in very different degree programs, and students in mathematics, because I have very eclectic interest in terms of research. And I wrote a piece of paper. I didn't make any slides. And the first 2 words I wrote on my paper is "be prepared," which is exactly what Lara said. So I ticked that off. I thought, you need to be prepared for the interview. And I guess I'm going to repeat some of the things that Lara said, but from my own perspective. And I think something that you didn't touch on, Lara, because I know that would be a whole other session, is prepare an appropriate CV for the position that you're applying for. If I get a CV that is clearly meant for a job out in the real world and industry, it doesn't mesh with what I'm looking for. It's not written in the way that I'm used to. So, you can get guidance, obviously, from the career advisors to how to put together a CV when you're applying for a research position, because maybe you're going to be highlighting slightly different things. So that's one thing. And I'm going to go through my notes here. It's quite remarkable. Look for some background on the researchers or the people who are going to be interviewing you. There's nothing we like better than to have a student say, well, I went to your website and I saw this very interesting interview that you did with CBC. Could you tell me a little bit more about that study? Obviously, we love that. It's flattering. And it also shows that the student has gone to some extra trouble to try and understand what it is that we do. Because at the end of the day, there is a relationship when you're recruiting someone to a research position, and you're going to work with them. Maybe it's only going to be for a few months, or maybe if things work well, you could work part-time while during the term. So there has to be something that meshes, and it's really nice when you see that the student is truly interested in you as a researcher. We're people, right? We like it when people are interested in what we do. One thing I'm not sure that Lara mentioned is, and again, it's under the be prepared. We do not all have CGPAs of 4, right? Not everybody does. I didn't. So you need to be prepared to speak to any academic weaknesses that may be in your CV. Sometimes, or if you've changed programs or there's a gap, that is something that an interviewer may look at and may ask you about. So be ready for that. Sometimes people are sick, they have to take time off, they have to do, they're caring for family members, whatever it is, be ready for that type of question. There's no shame in having not done well in one semester. And if someone doesn't hire you because of that, then it's their loss, as far as I'm concerned. So I really feel very strongly that don't lead with that. Don't say, well, I hope you noticed that I got a C in genetics. That's not, I wouldn't suggest you lead in it, but if the question comes, be ready. Don't be ashamed of that. And obviously, you're trying, if you're looking for a research position, you're trying to get additional expertise that may help you later on. So that's kind of the be prepared part before. And again, I divided it very much like Lara did into sort of the three components: the be prepared part, the before, the during, and then the after. So be on time. You said that as well, of course. I often start, maybe this is the wrong thing because I didn't take training. I often say, tell me a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this position. And that sometimes goes really well, or sometimes it can be, So I think if you're prepared, you can answer that kind of question. Be genuine. Don't oversell yourself, but really be genuine. And again, ask some questions. Make sure you've got questions ready in advance, because for me, the last thing I ask at the end of an interview is, do you have any questions for me? And oftentimes it's just silence. And I feel it's an awkward way to finish. Come up with some questions. You won't necessarily use them. Some types of questions, if this position, if I was able to get this position, who would I be working with? And would I be working with you directly, or would I be working with your student? Things that are not technical, but just ask some questions so you can finish off the interview in a nice way. I've got send an email afterwards. Absolutely. I won't forget. We had someone came for an interview for a faculty position. She actually sent a little card in the mail. And I remember the day after everybody got the cards, they said, did you get a card? And everybody was so excited that this individual had taken the time to write personalized cards. I'm not saying you have to write a card, but certainly an email. And as Laura suggested, it gives you a little bit of an opening to, you've made another communication with the person you're interviewing beyond the first communication. The other thing I will say is that if you're offered another position and you take it, please tell the person that you did the first interview with. We're all excited that you got another position, but you really should tell the other person, because you don't want to burn any bridges. We spend time interviewing, we spend time checking out references, and then we say, okay, this is my number one candidate. I'm going to contact her. And she says, well, I took a position 2 weeks ago. That's, I think that's also a little bit part of the etiquette. Also, and this is a little more tricky, and you should probably get advice on how to write such an email. If you're really not interested afterwards, if it's clear that this is not for you, don't be afraid to say that, because again, we can just part as friends, and we haven't put a lot of energy into each other. I had someone recently who interviewed, and I think we decided at the end that we weren't right for each other for this particular position. That's fine. She's looking for something, she now knows what I do. If she's suddenly interested in that, I would be quite happy to hear from her, but this particular position wasn't of interest. The other thing, what else did I want to say? I wrote some notes here. Oh yes, just some things that are on student CVs that I've looked at and actually thought, I want to speak to this student because there's something different about them. And I just wrote down a few things, and this is from probably some years ago. One student applied for any kind of a research assistant position with me, and I saw in their CV that they were an editor for the McGill Daily. I thought, yes, someone who can write. So it was like just something a little bit different on the CV that I thought, this is interesting. Also had one student who played first violin in one of the McGill orchestras. I thought, okay, the attention to detail practices, I thought I could use those skills. You know, what if I'm training someone to do the research, I need certain types of skills, and to see that kind of dedication. Or an elite athlete, that's also another thing, someone who has sort of staying power. So I do look, not so much if you say that, you know, I'm sorry to say, if you like cooking and stuff, that's not going to be very helpful for me. But if there's something that you've done, and Laura's mentioned this, you know, some kind of volunteering, I'm interested in that, because that suggests that you have people skills. So I look beyond just the academic part, but also what are the skills? If I need someone to interact with the participants in my study who are, you know, some of them are quite old, I want someone who's got people skills. I'm not so concerned if they got A in calculus. I want someone who's, you know, intelligent, and undergraduate would be great. They'll get this experience, but they also have people skills. So I look for things, some slightly different aspects of a CV, as well as, of course, the normal things. I think that's, I don't want to fill up the whole time talking, so I don't know if there are any questions.
Yeah, are there any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand or just unmute. Nina.
Yes.
Hi. I was wondering, when you were talking about those good people skills and those skills you don't necessarily put, it's not like maybe job-based or whatever, where would you find that in a CV? Would you put that in your skills section, and how would you elaborate upon that within the CV itself?
Well, Lara's going to answer that one, because I'm more familiar with academic CVs. Is there a special place for that? It usually comes towards the end, actually.
Yeah, it depends on, I guess, what you're trying to convey. So these days, a lot of CVs tend to have a section at the top called like a profile summary, something like that, where it's, you know, 5 or 6 main bullet points that, again, as Christina mentioned, you know, you want to customize every time you're applying to a new opportunity, right? So that's kind of your hook. That's where you're going to want to put, you know, 5 or 6 bullet points, borrow ideas from the job description, and say, hey, Dr. Wolfson, I have these 5 things that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So that's one section, and it's really not just writing leadership, organization. It's really writing things more well thought out than that. I hope that helps answer the question, Nina.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So can I ask a question? So Lara, you offer sessions on how to put together a CV, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically we ask students to have something ready, have something drafted, and then we can take a look together. We provide suggestions. It's all done within an appointment, so that you can learn and you can build your skill set, so that next time you're reviewing your CV, you know what to do on your own.
Yeah. Great, thank you. That's great. Yeah,
absolutely. And as you know, again, as Dr. Wolfson mentioned, there is a difference between, you know, applying to a customer service job in retail and applying to research. So you do want to, you know, incorporate different aspects and different sections. So including a section maybe called research interests, including a section on maybe some of like a big group project or a summative assignment that you worked on, and adding a few details if it was really research oriented. That really helps them see what types of skill sets you can bring to the table.
What are some things to not include on a research CV that you would normally include, you know, on a CV for like any other job?
Sometimes there will be a little text box at the top saying, I've wanted to study epidemiology since I was a toddler. That's the type of thing that you don't want to see on a CV. I mean, I know people are trying to say, I've always been interested in this, and sometimes it's just not genuine. You know, it's really not you to say that. If you don't even know what epidemiology is, that's okay too. You know, you're going to prepare, so you're going to look it up and get an idea of it, right, or of what it is. But it's okay to say, I'm interested, for instance, a CV for me, so I'm very interested in the medical field. Maybe I'd like to go to medical school after I finish my undergraduate degree, and I'd like to get some experience. Maybe it's the cover letter more that addresses that kind of thing, but sometimes the cover letters are they're sort of silly sometimes. And, you skim through it and you say, okay, so let's just look at the CV. But the cover letter gives you the opportunity to flesh out some things and say why you're applying for the position. But it's not just undergraduates who write. Lots of people, even applying for faculty positions, will write really quite unusual cover letters, and people sort of roll their eyes and say, well, let's skip that and let's get straight to the CV. So you can use the CV, the cover letter, to your advantage, and speak from the heart,
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think just to add on a little bit as well, it's not really about like what to include and what not to include. I guess it's more about, people's attention spans are so short these days. I'm sure Dr. Wolfson only takes a look at each CV for like maybe 30 seconds to a minute, unless she really wants to read through the candidate information in detail. So what information is going to attract the reader? So it's more about prioritization as opposed to what to include and what not to include, I think. And really, if you can keep it to one page, that would be ideal. That's kind of the sweet spot. But if you do need to have 2 pages, make sure that all of the most relevant information is on the first page, because again, somebody's attention span might just kind of not even notice that there's a second page. So you want to make sure that all those key details, those research interests, the main skill sets that you're offering, your education, what courses you're maybe taking that relate to that topic, is really featured on the first page.
So why do you think my first question is, tell me about yourself? It's because I haven't spent half an hour on the CV. I really want that kind of summary from the individual. The other just reminds me that many people have some research experience that they might not even think is research experience, that they did some volunteer work, or they sort of volunteered in some lab or something. If there by chance was any kind of outcome from that work, for instance, if there was a paper published, you're not necessarily an author, but if there was a publication from that, you're not going to claim it as your own publication, but it's sometimes helpful either in the interview or on the CV to say the work was eventually published, because as a researcher, that's good to know that, this person contributed in some way to this publication. So that's another thing that I found I sometimes have to pull that out of an interviewee and say, you worked for a couple of years, you said what you did. Were there any presentations? And, oh yeah, I had to give a lab presentation. Good. Okay. I'm happy to hear that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to your point, Dr. Wolfson, as well, like when I was doing my undergraduate studies at McGill, I didn't really think of certain things as like research experience, but I presented at an anthropology conference, for example, and I presented some research that I did. So like, yes, that would be something I would want to feature on my academic CV or my research CV, without, necessarily thinking, I was working in the lab or I was working paired with a particular professor or a PhD student. It was something that I did on my own, but it was something that I still presented to a group of my peers. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was very helpful for sure. I think, a lot of people don't necessarily realize what they're doing is research experience. We have a couple of questions drafted here that were, sent in. So I can get into those a little bit, and then maybe Jackson and I can alternate kind of asking those. So one question I have here is, how do I respectfully ask about pay during an interview, or should I ask about pay during an interview?
I was telling my recent experiences, a lot of students think that the positions are unpaid. And we get about halfway through the interview before I realized that they didn't realize they were going to get paid. So I generally will not give a salary during an interview. That usually comes later. At least that's the way I work, is that I will indicate that this is absolutely a paid position and it's going to be, a reasonable salary according to the various norms. It's only when we get to the next step where maybe there's an informal offer to say, look, I'm prepared to offer you the position and this is what the salary would be. people do ask, but it's hard to make that judgment during an interview because you don't exactly know what their skills are and where they fit on a salary scale. So.
Yeah, I would say as well, it's maybe not a question you want to address in the first interview. Perhaps it's something that the interviewer will ask you, like, what is your expected salary range? In which case you have to be prepared to answer that. So if you could go and do some benchmarking or look online to see what some comparable salaries might be, then that's something that you want to do ahead of time. You could, one of your questions at the end could be, I'm not quite clear. Is this a paid or an unpaid research opportunity, right? Present it in the way of like ignorance is bliss. And see where that takes you, I guess. And whether they, say that it's paid and they give you a figure, or they say it's paid, but we're figuring out the salary, that should hopefully be enough in terms of a response.
Because an interview is the beginning, if it goes well, the interview is the beginning of a process, not the end. And for some people, it's going to be the end, right? Obviously, but if it's going to move anywhere, it's the beginning, and there's a lot more that can be discussed in subsequent meetings.
If I could ask a question, what should you do if you're unprepared or don't know the answer to a question in an interview?
All right, I can start this one off. So the first thing that you really want to think about, don't just launch into an answer. I don't know if anybody's seen that episode of The Office where Michael Scott goes to New York and he just starts an interview question. He doesn't know where it's going. It's hilarious. I suggest you go look it up. But basically you don't want to start a response without knowing where it's going to end up, because you could just keep talking because you're nervous and you have no idea what you're actually saying. And then your brain is like, how do I stop this from happening? So it's really best, it might seem like an eternity for you, count down from 5 in your head, collect your thoughts and try answering the question to the best of your ability. Or, just be honest, say like, I'm really not clear what you mean by that. Could you please repeat the question? And if, again, really you have no clue, you can either say you have no clue, or if you know that it's back there somewhere and you need to let it kind of figure itself out, you can ask, can we come back to this question at the end of the interview? So there's 3 kind of strategies there. Wait and collect your thoughts, ask for clarification, or ask for it to be posed again or in a different way at the end.
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely really good advice. Another question we have here, I guess, is more specifically for research interviews, but the question is, what if I don't fully understand the research that I'm interviewing for? So yeah, how would someone, go about that if they maybe weren't at a level where they could completely understand the papers that they were looking through or that sort of thing?
That's an interesting question. So in my experience, most of the people I would recruit don't know what the research is about, which is why, my job is to train them in that kind of research. I think if you're interviewing for a job that's at a level higher than your expertise, then I think you're interviewing for the wrong job. Most researchers will provide some training, some background. I would hope they do. Not all researchers are perfect bosses either, but you should be getting some training. You can't be expected. My papers you can read because I'm an epidemiologist. They're not that complicated, but the basic scientists, even I can't read their papers, but you can get started and try and find some material, but you'll be trained. That's part of doing research. That no one's hiring you as a qualified researcher. They would be hiring you to be like a research intern to do activities, maybe pushing the envelope a little bit for you, but at the level that the researcher feels you can cope with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think in general, like if you wanted to, you can maybe ask them to break down like which specific tasks you're working on. And then that might give you a clear idea of how you're contributing to their like big picture research.
Tell me what exactly would I be doing? And if you're going to be just washing the test tubes, then that's your answer. If you're going to be doing something, you can say, and would I be trained? And chances are you would be. I think in most instances, yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really think that like the learning opportunities in labs are so important and the training goes along with that. Another question we got sent in is, what is something a candidate can do that might negatively affect their chance of getting the position in the interview?
Be late. That's bad. I would say after the interview, one of the things I do in an interview, if things are going well, I will generally say, well, can I get a couple of names of potential referees? I want you to contact them first and let them know, and then you can send me their contact information. If that contact information never arrives and there's no follow-up with the person I interviewed, that's a bad sign. I think there's not a lot, you know, if you're really genuine, I don't think there's a lot you can do to really mess up an interview. Believe it or not, researchers get a little nervous when they're doing interviews, right? I mean, this isn't something we do all the time. We tend to, you know, we do our own work. We're not that good necessarily at interviewing. So I don't think there's much you can do. The one thing I will mention, and this has become an issue because of the pandemic and Zoom, is if you're doing an interview from your home and you're doing Zoom, let's not have your roommate walking back and forth behind you. That's a little bit off-putting. It doesn't necessarily affect the interview, but it would make me feel a little awkward that I'm actually having an interview with several people. So, but I don't think there's a lot you can do to end up negatively.
I think, yeah, just using common sense, you know, being polite, being prepared, having that level of preparedness, it really helps. Even if you're nervous, you know, they'll know that you know your stuff and that you've taken the time, right? If you're nervous and you haven't prepared, then they're going to know that as well. And that's probably the worst thing you could do, is waste their time, because they are busy people. They've carved out, you know, half an hour or an hour of their day to meet with you. If you come unprepared or if you come late, forget it. Like, it's not going to work out, unfortunately.
But you're supposed to be nervous in an interview.
Yeah.
I mean, so we know that. And part of our job is to try and get through your nervousness and make you feel comfortable. I mean, that, you know, this is about working together. So we want to be able to have a relationship with the person that we're working with. We want to know that if we're going to click. So if someone is really nervous, it's my job to try and cut through that and talk about something else, maybe for a few minutes, and then just ease back into the interview.
Yeah. And as Dr. Wolfson mentioned at the beginning, like, not very many researchers are trained in interviewing. So again, use kind of your research that you've done ahead of time about their work and try and kind of navigate it to that direction and have more of a conversation rather than just question, answer. I think that that's going to be to your benefit as well.
And I do think the one thing that I find, and you know, it's not a negative thing, is that it's not unusual at the end when I say, "Do you have any questions for me?" and people say no. Have something, keep a couple of things in your pocket that are, you know, okay, they're not controversial, just something. So we can end on a nice way rather than, well, okay, then, you know, thank you and bye. So I think that's a really important thing for me anyway, for my interviews. I want it to be a conversation, as Laura says.
Yeah. And make sure you have, you know, 4, 5, 6 questions, because sometimes in their preamble and the way that they're describing their lab, that might answer, you know, 3 out of those 5, right? So you're only left with 1 or 2. You can also think about asking maybe some more value-added questions. So like, in the last 5 years, what was, you know, your teams, or what were the biggest outcomes of your research, for example? You know, you might see online that they've worked on several things in the last 5 years, but what to them is like their most proud accomplishment? I think that that's a good question to ask. Another one might be like, you know, are there any future projects that you're thinking of taking on if you get the funding? Could I be part of those? Like that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, sounds good. Another question we have is, you know, we're almost out of time, but what are some skills I should be sure to touch on when I'm asked about my skills?
So dependent upon what your applying for. I mean, I interview people where I absolutely have to have knowledge of programming. Yeah, so that, I need that. The position requires that. Others, it's have to have the ability to write. So it really depends on what I'm looking for. If I really need some academic background, but sometimes I just need, I need someone who can work independently, but know when to ask questions, is reliable, is going to be on time, is engaged and interested, those kinds of standard things. That's really what I'm looking for. But it's hard without talking about a specific position for me.
Yeah, I would agree as well. It kind of depends on what you're applying to, but what Dr. Wolfson just mentioned, the key things that all people want in an employee, you want to try and convey, right? Like that working independently, but room for growth as well. I think, again, maybe going back to the previous question, you don't want to come off as arrogant and that you know everything, because you're not going to be a pleasant person to work with, unfortunately. You want to have that growth mindset, that learning mindset, and, be okay with saying you don't know something if you need help, right? So I think that that's another key piece of interviewing for research roles, is like just wanting to learn. That's one of the key things.
Perfect. Thank you. Another question that got sent in is, what's the best dress code for the interview?
Well, right now, just, from the waist up, right? I'm not a big dress code person, but, just something you might wear if you were going out to dinner with someone. I mean, I don't want jeans with big holes in the knees and that kind of stuff. Someone's just done a little extra. I mean, that's not what I wear to work. We're sort of all casual where I work, but, just look nice, that's all.
I would agree as well. Like, wear something you'd wear to a nice dinner out. Don't overdo it. Don't come in a full suit. If you know that it's going to be a very casual setting you're walking into, you're going to feel very out of place, and then your confidence might just like tank. So, I mean, don't wear like a dirty hoodie.
Right.
Make sure you're like showered. I don't know, very common basic hygiene principles apply. But be yourself, be authentic. Don't go out and buy like a $500 outfit that you're only going to wear once. Like, that's not really necessary.
Right. I think sort of to wear the best of what you have, right? Because we don't want someone to come in looking really uncomfortable in an outfit that really isn't them. So, what's the best that you have? I mean, I know that in some settings it's different, but certainly in a research setting, it tends to be pretty casual. And you would probably be the best dressed person there for an interview, because after that, once you get the job, then it's going to be a less of a dress code.
Yeah. And I think, in general, again, you want to demonstrate that level of preparedness, that level of effort. So that's a visual cue, especially if you're meeting with them in person, is if you're dressed cleanly and nicely, and you've taken some time to put yourself together that morning, then I think that can go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. Do we have any last questions from the chat or from any of the attendees? Okay, does not seem like it. I think, those presentations were very thorough, and thank you so much to both of our speakers for answering all those questions, and taking this time out of your evenings. I'm sure you both are very busy, but we will definitely be sharing this recording with, through our SRI social media platforms so that more can access it. But thank you so much for coming, and we really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I was so pleased that Lara and I were in sync. I was a little nervous about that.
No, I think we both conveyed very similar messaging, and hopefully everybody's coming away with a few,